Good morning to you in Monterey. Good afternoon from Philadelphia, and for my colleague, Dr. Kacper Gradon. Good evening from Warsaw, Poland. The pandemic effects have been far-reaching, touching nearly every aspect of daily life. The problem being considered is the potential for Russian malign influence campaigns to exploit the pandemic's effects and exacerbate societal divides created by COVID-19. As of March 1st, 2021, in the United States, infections reached 28 million and over 500,000 deaths. World infections were 114 million, with deaths over 2.5 million. Economic activity has been curbed, and chasms in societies have been widened. Let's stop here and talk about some definitions. Propaganda is true or false information spread to persuade and is often connected by governments. Disinformation is false information deliberately created to cause harm. Misinformation is information that is false but not intended to cause harm. And malinformation is genuine information intended to cause harm. Russia will continue to use disinformation against the West, especially during the election processes. The purpose is to undermine the legitimacy of democratic governments. They intend to aggravate social divisions such as race, politics, ideology, and religion. The use of disease, race, and a public health crisis for the Russians is not new. In 1983, KGB launched Operation Infections. The premise was that HIV/AIDS was created by the U.S. Army at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and intended to be a weapon against the Black population. This had long-lasting effects. A 1997 survey of Black Americans found that 29% believed it to be true or possibly true that HIV was man-made to infect Black people. Prolonged effort to undermine democracy reached a new level in 2016 with the election. It increased the focus, the level, and the scope of those activities. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence found that the purpose was to undermine U.S. democracy, undermine the Clinton administration, and to a lesser extent, promote Trump and a preference for his candidacy. Russian social media attempts to increase tensions were significantly greater in 2016. During the election period, a fake Black Lives Matter group attracted more followers than the actual Black Lives Matter Facebook page. In 2016, after the election, the Internet Research Agency from St. Petersburg organized a protest that attracted 10,000 people in New York City, including filmmaker Michael Moore. Many differences defined in the media as race-related. Philadelphia Inquirer did a poll just 2 weeks ago and found that 14% of Black Philadelphians planned to get the vaccination, and less than 20% thought it would be effective. Some of this distrust stems from a Tuskegee study, a long-term study of syphilis inflicted on Black people. The pandemic has also highlighted socioeconomic differences. Differences such as access to health care, essential workers, the availability of insurance, the ability to work from home, and finally, even vacation homes and how that's been a divide in our society. Here, I'll turn it over to Kacper.
Russia has had a long-standing hostile relationship with the U.S. and its Western partners. Following the Cold War, it perceived that the U.S. and the West took advantage of Russia and its weakness in the 90s, expanding the Western sphere of influence into Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, a long-time part of the former Soviet Union. The NATO expansion brought former Warsaw Pact states into the alliance and extended NATO to Russia's western borders. There's no reason to expect that COVID will alter Russia's behavior towards the US and the West. Instead, we should expect continued attempts to undermine Western democratic legitimacy. Russian Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov stated in 2013 that non-military means of conflict have grown to exceed the effectiveness of military force in many cases. He proposed that asymmetric methods be used to undermine the target state legitimacy in the eyes of its population. Russia is attempting to weaken European public support for the EU by criticizing and undermining its ability to manage the pandemic. Before Russia's malign influence campaigns are employed in the United States, they are frequently used against European allies and partners, particularly in the areas formerly occupied or controlled by the Soviet Union. Russia seeks to undermine the legitimacy of democratic institutions in Europe and to attack NATO. Their objective is also to show the Russian population at home that the West is weak and divided. This fits very well into Russian neo-imperial agenda. According to diplomatic sources, Central and Eastern Europe is often a testing ground for disinformation tactics prior to their use in Western Europe and the US. The countries of specific concern are the former Baltic republics of the USSR, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, now EU members and host to important NATO institutions. And US ambassador to Poland explicitly said that Poland is the petri dish for Russia to try out their disinformation campaigns with their trolls and bots. And during the COVID pandemic, Russia shifted its focus on propaganda to SARS, spreading conspiracy theories about NATO, which is a major target of its effort. The pandemic has become an opportunity for Russia to conduct disinformation campaigns that include both overt and covert propaganda directed at EU, NATO, and the US. Russia's influence campaigns related to COVID is carried out by Russia Today and Sputnik, the military services, the ministries of foreign affairs and defense, as well as their trolls, bots, and fake accounts. The Russians drew on their experience in similar actions against Ukraine, the US presidential campaigns, French Yellow Vest protests in 2018, and Brexit. Polarization, conflict, and unrest are the hallmarks of Russian disinformation agenda. And I have to say that Brexit in particular was a major success of the Russian disinformation machine. The consequences of the referendum undermined the trust in the European Union and became a major socioeconomic problem, not only for the United Kingdom, but also for the continental European partners, also on the military side. The Russian campaigns undermines the durability of American guarantees to Europe, seeking to damage or eventually to break up NATO. In March last year, Russia used fake accounts related to the US-led Defender Europe 2020 military exercises in Poland in an effort to convince the European public that American soldiers were responsible for the spread of the pandemic in Europe. And now I will turn to Wesley.
We believe that two measures would be important to start to counter some of the misinformation campaign. We recommend the establishment of an academic center or institute taking into account multiple disciplines that need to work together to counter misinformation. Actors would include academics, government from the federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial levels, foreign players, civil society, as well as fact checkers. The idea would be to develop new strategies and tactics against misinformation. We also believe that exercises would be important to create those kinds of relationships, begin to work together, because when crises happen, it's too late to start forming relationships.